Hello, and welcome to the Producers Guild conversation with the creative team behind Fargo. We'd like to thank our friends at FX for making this event possible. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Daniel Holloway. Daniel is executive editor TV at Variety, where he oversees coverage of the television business across multiple platforms. His work has been recognized with the Southern California Journalism Award for Entertainment News Reporting and an Eddie and Ozzie Award for Investigative Reporting. Welcome, Daniel. Welcome, panelists. And please, Daniel, take it away.
And thank you, Noah Hawley and Warren Littlefield, for doing this today.
Our pleasure.
So Noah, this is season 4. It's it's what they call a big swing. It's period in the 1950s. It's a crime war. There's a Wizard of Oz tornado. When you looked at doing something on this scale for the 4th season of the show, how did you set about achieving that scale while also keeping the show, as rooted in character as it always had been through its first 3 installments?
Well, I guess after 3 years, making a show in the bitter cold just wasn't hard enough for us. So we tried to figure out how to make it harder. And scale seemed to be a good way. Period seemed to be a good way. Old cars with no heat seemed to be a good way. And the list kind of goes on and on. The problem, and it always gets me, is that, we conceive of these shows in warm rooms. We write them in warm rooms. I think I've learned to really minimize when I write that exterior night. Because I've learned that, but otherwise I don't feel like I've learned very much in terms of censoring the story in order to make it easier to make, which at the end of the day, no one ever lays on their deathbed and thinks, I saved so much money. So, I think that the challenge of it, the scale of it, the reason to make it, the only reason to do another one is to try to top ourselves and to make something that felt like it deserved another shot at it, that the audience was going to say, okay, we've watched 30 hours of Fargo, why should we watch 10 more? And the idea would be because this is an event.
You did shoot in the tropical paradise of Chicago this season, so you at least had that going for you.
Apparently they call it the Windy City.
Chicago in the winter.
Who knew? Warren, when you look at this season, as a part of the totality of what you all have done with this in what's been, I guess, 8 or 9 years, how do you think that it fits into the the world that you guys have built?
Well, I think in echoing Noah's words, each year we like to scare ourselves. We like to continue the saga of Fargo, and I think go places that we haven't been before and the audience hasn't been before. And that exploration, the fear, the danger of living up to our past, that excites us. I will say that our partners at FX and MGM, they jumped off the cliff with us. This was far more ambitious than anything we'd ever attempted. In talking about some of the uniqueness of it, Noah didn't mention 24 series regulars. And so all of it, the period, the scope, the size, those vehicles, every toaster, every belt, every tie, all of that is very, very expensive. So, we doubled really the budget of anything we had done before on Fargo. But I think it's a tribute to immersing yourself in a world and feeling this is exactly where I am. I am in Kansas City. It's 1950, and I'm feeling that world. And in that sense, we're enormously proud of it.
Warren, I mean, anyone who knows TV knows your career. And when we talk about the scale of this show, I mean, how does it stack up against everything else that you've done in terms of just its bigness and its ambition?
You know, Fargo, as a producer for this chapter in my life, Fargo put me on the map. So it doesn't matter how cold, it doesn't matter how late, how insane the ambitions are. When Noah says, you know, I think I have another story to tell. That's it. I'm there because it, for me, I got to relish in the detail of what it takes to. I'd been a part of excellence. As a broadcaster, I was kind of the Ed Sullivan who went, there you go. And as a producer, I get to really, really play in the detail of how to bring Noah's vision to life, how to take a entire crew of artists and have them fall in line with his vision and his words. That's exciting. The detail, you know, I don't have as many plates to spin, but I love the plates that I am spinning. And I love, you know, so far, not too many are falling.
Noah, for season 4, you know, you have a story that is, you know, it's many things, but it is essentially, you know, a war between an Italian American crime family and a Black crime family in Kansas City in the 1950s. What was appealing to you about that as a, you know, a starting point or a base for this story?
Well, you know, for me, the story of Fargo boils down to, and here you are, and it's a beautiful day, and for what? A little bit of money. You know, the things that Americans do for money. And for some reason, I was attracted to this image of these two crime families trading their youngest sons as a way to keep the peace, and this idea that both were on the outside of the mainstream economy, and therefore the things that they had to do for money were crime and power, the struggle for power, all in an attempt to ultimately become American in a more mainstream way. And so that idea of the story in this moment in history, when you know, Italian Americans themselves weren't fully considered American or white, it seemed like a really fertile period to explore this idea of America, which is what I feel like the show has always done.
And the can't having it be Kansas City at that time, right? It's every season of the show has had a sort of a specific location within this broader Coen Midwestern milieu. You know, what was interesting about that place at that time?
Well, it's the center. You know, it is both the center of the north-south corridor and the east-west corridor, and actually was a big mafia town. You know, everything that went north or south passed through there, and it was also in my mind, it was a place where two groups collided. You know, you have the end of what has been called two great migrations, the Southern Europeans from Italy and Southern Europe, and, you know, African Americans moving up from the South, escaping Jim Crow to northern cities. And the collision of these two groups, both of whom arrived trying to get into the game, and kind of locked out of the top tier and having to fight at the bottom tier, to see, who would survive and prosper. So it felt relevant on that level, and also, part of the larger Midwestern story that the Coens have explored. Still plenty wintry, but getting into the kind of plains states as well. There just seemed something that felt like it fit into the larger mythology of the story.
And there's an interesting sort of, it's there from the very beginning in the first episode. There's an I don't know if I'd call it, if it's right to call it a device, but one of the things that the season hinges on is that these two families, they swap sons, and that this is, sort of in the mythology of this story, something that has happened for generations almost, or for decades among these crime families. Where did that idea come from, and what was appealing about it to you?
Well, when you talk about assimilation, right, which is on some level, we're a nation of immigrants, and so this idea of America is an agreement that we've made, and everyone who comes to America then has to become American. And that process of assimilation, which often requires a certain amount of surrendering of the past, the rituals and practices of your home country, to adopt the sort of baseball and Americana of your adopted land. This allowed us to explore that idea of assimilation in a more personal way, not what it takes to assimilate into a country, but what it takes to assimilate into a family. What is it like for Chris Rock's son to be taken in by these Italian Americans? How does he fit in? How does he stay aware of what's safe and what's not safe? And also, how is he treated? We see that when Chris Rock takes in the youngest Italian American child, that kid eats at the table with them. He plays with the other kids, but for Chris Rock's son in the Italian household, he's not allowed downstairs. He doesn't eat with the family. He's given to the lowest man on their totem pole, which is which is this Irish mutt played by Ben Whishaw, whose job is basically just take care of this kid. We don't want to see him. We don't want to hear from him. So you learn a lot both about the children and the adults by how that situation unfolds.
There's
Daniel, I'll just interrupt and say, the first time Noah told me this story, I was like, this is brilliant. Did Shakespeare ever do this setup? And Noah looked at me and said, no, he has not. I said, are you sure? He said, nope, this is me. And yeah, I just thought it was such a brilliant way in to personalizing these stories.
Warren, knowing what was coming story-wise, with some of the things that Noah has been talking about now, and sort of the difference in the difference in the way these two different groups assimilated or didn't assimilate, and moments in the story like one that comes late in the season when Satchel, Chris Rock's character's son, is sitting in the passenger seat of a car in a white town, and a white cop comes up and starts giving him a hard time, knowing that these things were coming, and knowing that this is a story that he'd been working on, and then seeing what was happening more broadly in the country this summer. Did you have a sense of like just how much it would seem like these, this period piece would seem contemporary?
It really did. And I remember getting on the phone with Sylvan White, who was directing the scene at the end of the Tornado black and white episode, where Satchel is, a couple of guys pull over in their pickup truck, and you have this awful feeling of racism and violence is about to happen. And so I said, you need to talk to the actor and make sure he's okay with doing this scene. We know the power in this scene. We know he is going to actually reach into his waistband, pull out a gun, and he is going to take power back in that scene. But I don't want this kid to be traumatized. And that's the world that we're in right now. And it mattered a lot to me that Sylvan's also an African-American director. He had a particularly strong bond with our actor. And I said, please just call me after you've spoken, and I just want to know he's feeling okay about doing the scene. And his words were, he's looking forward to it. And so, yeah, I think we were highly aware that we were colliding with the real world, even though we were set in 1950.
Noah, in every season, there's a character that is sort of not the protagonist and the sort of moral center of the show. And, in season 1, it's Allison Tolman's character. And season 2, it's Patrick Wilson's. And in season 3, it's Carrie Coon's. All of those characters are white cops. And in the 4th season, that character's a Black teenage girl, Ethel Rita Smutney, who Mary Crutchfield plays. Was that an intentional pivot, I guess?
It was. The conception and the writing of this happened, now maybe two plus years ago. But once it became clear that the story was going to be primarily about people of color and immigrants in this community in 1950, I started to think about that moral bar graph that we always have, where there's always a sort of all good character and on one side and a kind of evil character on the other side. And as you said, including Frances McDormand, all of those characters have been cops, and all of those cops have been white. And in thinking about this story, I thought, well, the moral white cop is not everybody's experience of white cops. And so we're going to need to have cops. Obviously, it's a crime story. But what if we try to move that moral pillar to a different character? And so I expanded my definition of cop, and came up with this kind of rear window scenario in which Amiri Crutchfield's character, whose parents run a mortuary, lives across the street from this nurse who she sees at all these funerals for her patients, and begins to realize that this nurse is up to no good. And in that way, she's pulled into the story. But this allowed her to be this sort of moral pillar character while still having a bit of a detective role, and also allowed us to, to really explore our police characters in a more complex moral universe. This idea that Jack Houston's character is clearly a crooked cop who takes money, who plays both sides. And then here comes Tim Oliphant's U.S. Marshal, who is, a straight-laced by the numbers guy, but also happens to be kind of racist. And it puts you in this situation in which you're watching the scene between these two cops, and one of them is a racist and the other is crooked but not a racist. And it forces you to do some moral jujitsu on your own to kind of figure out, well, so is one of these guys better than the other guy? That spectrum of morality is always so interesting to me for the audience, and who they will choose to invest in or root for.
Warren, did you ever think you'd see Chris Rock back on TV?
I put my fishing line into Chris's pond so many times, and he acknowledged that. And this time I actually hooked him and was able to reel him in. It was such a joy. He was really so committed. After Chris and Noah had lunch, that was it. He was full on in and had such cred with his kids because he was doing Fargo. So he was a proud dad, and then he just jumped in.
No, what do you feel like he brought to that role? I mean, he's such a huge presence.
Well, I mean, to me, he is what the character is, which is an entrepreneur, which is someone who started with nothing and looked around and said, I don't want to end with nothing. And who literally created an international brand using his wits. A man alone on a stage that's all he had, and some words. And he's also, he's an older guy now. He's had some setbacks. He's had some perspective, it feels like. So there is the sort of wisdom that comes with age, and I think he also, it allowed him to be serious for a minute, and so much of his comedy is so topical, and so much of it is driven by anger, that I think it's interesting to mine those feelings and take away the kind of armor of comedy for him. I mean, he is the straight man in that show, and Jason Schwartzman is the funny one. And I think that was really interesting to me to watch, and I hope that was interesting to the audience as well.
Were you conscious when you were casting Schwartzman of the meta quality of having a Coppola as a crime boss in your show?
I mean, it crept up on me. It was not my first thought. When I think of Jason, I associate him so much more with the Wes Anderson work than his sort of familial relations. And it was only after a bit of time that I kind of was reminded, oh, right, and his mother and his cousins and et cetera. What was fascinating was that in taking on this role, he got to look at, a lot of original writings and journals and letters and stuff from his own families coming to America. And I think he really, there was no one on set who was more dedicated to getting it right. Jason is a guy, you can't get him to leave the set. Like, his poor stand-in had nothing to do, because Jason, we'd rehearse the scene, and then the camera would come in, the lighting, and Jason would he just want to stay and rehearse it with camera, and he just wanted to be part of it. And that was really great.
You guys were a couple weeks out from being wrapped when the production shutdown went into effect, and due to the pandemic. And I think we're probably one of the bigger shows that was impacted in that way. When you look at the finished product, do you see the effects of that months-long interruption and restart that you had to go through, or do you feel like what you ended up with is what you would have had by and large regardless?
Well, we got lucky. We got lucky in that we shot all the way through the black and white episode. And we had just started to shoot the last 2 episodes, and I came in to do a week of reshoots, and that's when we shut down. And we got lucky because there was a natural place to put a time jump between the black and white episode, in which young Satchel is kind of orphaned out in the sticks, and when we come back to Kansas City for the gang war. And why I say we got lucky is because 6 months later, those children were a foot taller, you know, and if we hadn't been able to put in a natural time jump, it would have felt crazy, you know, that, but because Satchel he had to walk home, it took time, etc. You know, so we got lucky on that level. I don't, when I look at those last 2 episodes, feel the jump. I feel like all these dedicated professionals went off and they kept their engines revving. And then when they were called back in, they came in like it was yesterday and they got the job done. What do you think, Warren?
Absolutely. I mean, it represents, we were one of the first shows that went back into the fray. And hundreds and hundreds of hours of preparation, protocols. And then there was this sense of we're ahead of anybody else. And I think the cast and the crew, God bless them, they were kind of turned on by being out in front of everybody. And if we can make this work, we feel like there's an industry behind us who can function during COVID in a way that's safe. And I think we had some pretty innovative plans. You know, we had a unit that was all exterior. We had a unit that was interior, and then actors would cross back, and the director would cross back. But we kept those units separate and apart, and they were separate units that were built smaller than previously, but they were built to go to war during COVID and make Fargo. And I think we got inspired work out of it. And so we start the season by luring the audience in to the colors of fall and the beauty of fall, and then kind of the horror of winter reveals itself. And we come out in the end, and we've gone a full cycle, and it's green again, and it all ended up working for us. Don't want to do it again that way, but it all worked.
I don't want you to have to do it again that way.
Thank you.
No, you could you talk about the letter that you shared with the cast and the crew as you guys got back up and running? I believe you had a fairly apt analogy for the endeavor you guys were on.
Yeah, you know what? I think what helped us in going back during COVID, or that early, before there was really proven protocols in place, was that we only had to do it for 13 days, you know, of shooting. We obviously had prep before that, but 2 weeks felt doable to me. It felt like you can get through that and keep people safe. But of course, we can only keep people safe at work. So what you need the crew to do and the cast is to agree that for those 2 weeks, they're going to suspend their life. And so I wrote this note and I said, you know, in the not too distant future, Tom Cruise is going to go to space, right? He's going to go to space. He's going to make a movie in space. And space obviously is a place in which you will die if you are out in space without the proper precautions. And so we need to think about this, about Chicago as space, right? We need to think about the life or death nature of what we're taking on. And you know, you all need to agree to orbit your life for those 2-3 weeks. And, you know, everyone did. You know, we got through it all with no cases, and you know, I think certainly the cast and the crew felt taken care of. I don't necessarily know how to do it, you know, for 6 months on a movie without just accepting that people are going to get COVID. And I mean, I think that's what we're seeing is that, you know, people get COVID, and then of course you have to actually test them again and make sure that they actually have it, because there's a lot of false negatives. But you know, we managed to get in and get out, and it all went well.
Warren, the industry is still dealing with this. I mean, as Noah said, it's like we live in this reality now where it's like sort of not if it's going to show up on your set, but what do you do when it happens? I mean, for the business as a whole, what do you think the long-term effects of this period are going to be?
I think we're still learning what that will be. I will say that I think that there are efficiencies that the business has learned. One of the interesting things is an 18-hour day was just an average day in our production lives. And for health and safety, what we determined is, okay, the 12-hour shoot day, the basis of how you schedule a day, that's going to be a 10. And we know that various departments will come in before and wrap out after, and so it gets a little longer. But that was deemed to be more healthy and safe and better for everyone. So then, of course, the question is, well, if you're working a 10-hour day instead of a 12-hour day, and you have 10 days to shoot an episode, then whoa, you need extra days. And what the industry showed us is that they could actually prepare for that day, have goals of that day, and operate more efficiently. And that, in fact, maybe like the rest of the world, we don't need to put in an 18-hour day. Maybe it's better for everyone. And so I think it's been, what's the light in this dark tunnel? I think there are going to be some more humanistic ways of doing the wonderful, brilliant, and insane things that we do, and we'll just do it a little better and safer. And so I think we come through it sadly with the losses that the world has experienced. But I think as an industry, in a real leadership position, you're loath to find anywhere else in this country and in the industry. You're loath to find anyone who has these kinds of statistics of keeping people healthy, safe, and working. And that's admirable. That says a lot for our industry, and I think gives us confidence as we move forward.
Noah, I know that you have always said, with each season of this show that you don't want to do another unless you think you can make it the best season. With that in mind, where's your head at in terms of whether or not there will be a season 5 of Fargo?
Well, I guess where my thoughts go now is, how would I finish this? Is there one more story to tell that feels like a concluding statement about this world that Joel and Ethan built that I've been able to expand? And along those levels, I have a few ideas. As with the previous seasons, it's not going to be the next thing that I do. So I will have time to kind of flesh it out more. But it does feel like, there may be one more thing to say, to bring a cast together. Probably a smaller cast, probably a more contemporary story, but don't hold me to it. That I think might wrap things up.
And that's music to my ears. But Daniel, I will also tell you that he will scare the living shit out of me when he ultimately says, here's what I'm thinking. He will manage to do that, and I'll be there.
Well, Warren, I am looking forward to you being scared shitless. Warren, Noah, thank you both so much. It was really great to talk to you both.
Cheers.
Thank you so much.